The sound hit the room before anyone's brain could process what their eyes had just seen. An open-handed slap. Hard, deliberate. The kind that snaps a head sideways and leaves the air in the room suddenly impossible to breathe. The man who threw it was 6'2", dressed in army green, chest stacked with ribbons, voice already rising before the echo died. The woman who absorbed it didn't scream, didn't stumble, didn't cry. She turned her face back slowly, looked at him with eyes that held something far colder than anger, and said nothing. That silence was the most terrifying thing in the room. If you've never seen someone absorb a blow, like it was nothing more than wind, stay right here, because what woman does next will make your jaw drop. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because every single week we bring you two stories that will stop you cold and remind you that the quietest person in the room is sometimes the most dangerous one. Drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Like this video so more people can find it. Now let's go back to that emergency room, because what happened over the next 48 hours changed everything for everyone inside that building. The morning had started the way most Tuesdays started at Calvary Cross Medical Center in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, understaffed, overlit, and humming with the kind of controlled chaos that passed for normal in any emergency department running near capacity since the first cold snap of October hit the Susquehanna Valley. Nurse Lauren Merritt had been on shift since 6. It was now pushing 11:30, and she hadn't sat down once. She'd drawn blood from a 63-year-old man who kept calling her sweetheart and pulling at her sleeve. She'd a wound dressing on a woman 3 beds down who swore she was allergic to everything except the specific antibiotic that hadn't been prescribed. Talked a 19-year-old through a panic attack while simultaneously charting vitals for 4 other patients, and had done all of it without complaint, without fanfare, and without anyone in the hallway noticing, because it was simply the texture of the work. None of that was unusual. All of that was Tuesday. What was unusual was bed 7. His name was Corporal Dale Carver, 29 years old, recently returned from his second deployment, admitted the night before with dehydration and a cardiac arrhythmia that his discharge paperwork from the VA had apparently decided wasn't worth flagging prominently. He was stable. He was resting. His IV line was running exactly the way Dr. Okafor had written it, a slow, controlled rate, because his chart showed a left ventricular function that hadn't bounced back to baseline yet, and a cardiology consult note that used the phrase fluid sensitive 3 times in 2 paragraphs. Lauren had read every word of it, twice. She was standing at the bedside at 11:40, adjusting the pump and running a quiet eye over the waveform on the cardiac monitor, when the curtain yanked back behind her. The man who pulled it open didn't knock. He didn't slow down. He came through the gap like he owned the square footage on the other side, and he filled the doorway the way only certain men do, men who have spent their entire adult lives being told that their presence itself constitutes authority. He was dressed in army greens, service ribbons, arranged in neat rows across his left chest, and he moved through the hospital bay with the aggressive ease of someone who had never once doubted that rooms rearranged themselves around him when he walked in. Colonel Richard Voss was 44 years old, sharp-jawed, and built like someone who still ran 5 miles every morning, whether he felt like it or not. He was also Dale Carver's older brother by 15 years, and the look on his face when his eyes landed on the IV pump said he had arrived with opinions fully formed and zero interest in revising them. "What is that drip rate?" he asked. Not hello, not good morning, not excuse me. Just that flat, immediate, and calibrated to communicate that the question itself was already a mild form of accusation. Lauren didn't look up from the pump. 75 milliliters per hour, per physician order. That's too slow. He's dehydrated. You can look at him and see it. He presented with dehydration last night. He's been rehydrating since admission. His labs this morning show his sodium and creatinine, both in the Magetan, are both trending in the right direction. She finished the adjustment and turned to face him fully. His chart also indicates a left ventricular ejection fraction that we need to. I didn't ask for a lecture. The cutoff was smooth and practiced. The tone of a man who had interrupted people mid-sentence his entire career and had never once been told it was a problem. I'm asking you to increase the rate. He looks pale. He looks like he needs more fluid, not less. Lauren kept her voice even. Colonel Voss, I hear your concern, and I want you to know his comfort and recovery are exactly what I'm focused on. But his cardiac function is a real factor in how we're managing this. If we push fluids faster than the current order allows, we risk overloading his pulmonary circulation. That would mean fluid in his lungs, and at that point, we are looking at a significantly more serious situation than where we started. Are you a cardiologist? The question landed exactly the way it was designed to. A 2x4 to the knees meant to cut her off at the credibility line and remind her of her position in a hierarchy he had already decided was the relevant one. No, Lauren said. I'm the nurse responsible for his care on this shift. And the physician, who is a cardiologist, is the one who wrote the order I'm following. Voss stepped one pace closer. Not a dramatic move. Just enough to change the geometry of the room and make her aware that he was bigger than her and that he was comfortable with that fact. My brother is a decorated combat veteran. He did 2 tours and came back in this condition, and you are telling me that this hospital's position is that he gets a drip rate chosen by someone who isn't even in this room? Dr. Okafor is available. I can page her right now, and you can speak with her directly about the reasoning behind. I don't need the doctor. He said it with the certainty of a man who has decided that needing explanations is itself a form of weakness. I need you to do your job. Increase the rate. I won't change the rate without a physician order. She said it the same way she'd said everything else, not loudly, not with an edge, but with the specific flatness of someone who has decided on a position and doesn't require anyone's validation to hold it. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes something. Lauren had been in enough rooms, both inside hospitals and in other, very different contexts. She no longer discussed to recognize the particular quality of that silence. The way certain men breathe right before they do something they've already decided is justified. She didn't step back. She didn't drop her gaze. And then Richard Voss raised his right hand and slapped her across the left cheek. It wasn't a tap. It wasn't a startled reflex. It was a full motion, open-handed strike delivered with adult force, and it cracked through the bay loud enough that a nurse 2 curtains down stopped what she was doing. The impact snapped Lauren's head to the right. Her badge swung on its lanyard. A small cup of tongue depressors rattled on the counter behind her. The heat that spread across her cheekbone was immediate and specific, not just the sting of impact, but the pressure of tissue compressing against bone. From the bed, Dale Carver's eyes came fully open. Rick, don't. Voss was already pivoting toward the curtain, adjusting the front of his jacket with one hand the way someone straightens a collar after an activity they consider finished. I want her supervisor. I want her removed from this patient's care immediately, and I want someone with actual competence in this room within the next 10 minutes. Are we clear? He pulled the curtain back and walked out. Lauren stood completely still. She was breathing. Her feet were planted. The welt was already forming. She could feel it in the specific way that blows to the face announce themselves. A warmth spreading from point of impact outward in concentric rings of consequence. Her left eye had watered involuntarily, not from crying, but from the simple neurology of a struck nerve, and she blinked it clear. She did not raise her voice. She did not follow him into the hallway. She reached into the left pocket of her scrubs, pulled out her personal cell phone, and typed a single text message to a number that did not have a name attached to it in her contacts, just a string of digits she had memorized years ago and never deleted. The message was 4 words. She hit send. put the phone back in her pocket, picked up Dale Carver's chart. Your IV rate is staying exactly where it is, she said, directing this at the patient, not as the space where the colonel had been standing. I'm going to page Dr. Okafor now so she can come speak with your family directly. That will be better for everyone. Dale Carver was staring at her. He was pale even before his illness, and right now he looked hollowed out by the admission, by the arrhythmia, by the sight of what his brother had just done. I'm sorry, he said. His voice cracked at the edges. He's not, that isn't. I'm sorry. He's been like this since I got back. Like he needs to fix everything, and he doesn't know how, so he stopped, pressed his lips together. I'm sorry. It's not your fault, Lauren said. Not warmly, not coldly, just true. Rest. I'll be back. She walked out of Bay 7, turned left instead of right, went 14 steps to the medication room, closed the door behind her, and stood there for exactly 30 seconds. Her hands were steady. She noted that. They were steady, which meant she was okay, which meant she could keep working, which was what she was going to do. She opened the door and went back to the floor. The charge nurse on the floor was Sandra Kulik. Sandra, 22 years in the system, built like someone who had absorbed every possible category of difficult situation and developed, over time, a kind of professional density that made her impossible to rattle. She was at the station when Lauren came around the corner, and she looked up from a chart and then stopped looking at the chart entirely. Tell me, Sandra said. Lauren told her. Concise, chronological, without embellishment and without softening. The request she'd declined, the escalation, the strike, the exact location on her face and the direction of the blow, the text she'd sent and to whom she hadn't said. Sandra's expression didn't shift, which with Sandra was the tell. Her expression not moving meant the temperature underneath it was high enough that she'd made a deliberate decision to cap it. She looked at Lauren's cheek for a long moment and then said, "Security footage from Bay 7. I was going to ask you to pull it before anyone else requests it." Already thinking the same thing. Sandra was already reaching for the phone. You need to be seen by the on-call physician. That's not optional. After I finish documenting the drip rates and the interaction. Lauren, I need the documentation complete and time-stamped before anything else moves. You know why. Sandra knew why. 3 seconds of silence confirmed it. Fine. Then you go to occupational health immediately after. Non-negotiable. Agreed. Sandra made the call to security. Lauren went to a terminal and began typing. She documented everything. The time she had entered Bay 7, the pump settings and the corresponding physician order number, the patient's current vitals and the trend line from admission, the conversation with Colonel Voss, word for word as she remembered it, the refusal to change the order and the clinical rationale, the strike, the time, the location on her body, her own condition immediately afterward. She noted the patient's response. She noted the direction Voss had walked when he left. She was thorough. She was precise. She was the way she'd been trained to be in environments where the documentation was sometimes the only record that couldn't be revised. Dr. Adeze Okafor was 37, Nigerian-American, and had come up through residency at a program that had a reputation for working its residents until they were either brilliant or gone. And Okafor had come out brilliant and with a spine made of something harder than the average. She received Lauren's page at 12:03, wrapped up a consult on the 4th floor, and came down to find Lauren at the station instead of in Bay 7. She looked at Lauren's face and stopped walking mid-stride. Who? Not a question. A category. Patient's brother. Colonel Voss. He wanted me to increase the drip rate without an order. I declined. He struck me. Lauren kept it brief. She was watching the doctor's face the way she watched cardiac monitors for information, for patterns, for what the data actually meant. What the data meant on Okafor's face right now was controlled fury, moving rapidly toward action. He's still in the building. As of 20 minutes ago. Yes. He went to find the nursing supervisor. Okafor looked at the welt on Lauren's cheek, fully developed now into something that had its own color and geography, the shape of an adult palm, rendered in bruise across her left cheekbone. Something passed through the doctor's eyes that wasn't professional and wasn't going to be put into a chart. Then she straightened. I'm going to Bay 7. Then I'm going to talk to administration. She paused. You filed an incident report? At 12:45. Occupational health? 1 o'clock. Dr. Perez. It's in the system. Okafor looked at her for a beat longer than was clinically necessary. You were doing this while he was still on the floor, making complaints about you. He's going to try to make this about my competence, Lauren said. I wanted the record clear before that conversation gained any traction. The doctor nodded slowly. It was the nod of someone recognizing something they hadn't expected, a kind of professional intelligence that operated several moves ahead of the visible board. Don't change anything about Dale Carver's care plan. I wasn't going to. Okafor almost said something else. Decided against it. Went to Bay 7. Paul Garrett had been nursing supervisor at Calvary Cross for 6 years. Before that, he'd been a floor nurse for 11, had left bedside care when his L4-L5 disc announced it was no longer interested in 12-hour shifts, and had moved into administration with the slightly rueful acceptance of someone who knows they're good at the new job, but misses the old one. He was a reasonable man. He listened well. He was also, at this particular moment, sitting across from Richard Voss in the supervisor's office and experiencing the specific sensation of a man who has been told two incompatible versions of reality and is being asked to choose one quickly. Voss's version was structured and delivered with military efficiency. The nurse had been unresponsive to family concerns, had been dismissive of legitimate medical questions, had shown an attitude that bordered on insubordination toward family members, and had created a hostile environment in what should have been a supportive care setting. He had attempted to correct her, and she had responded with open defiance. He wanted her formally removed from his brother's case. He wanted the hospital to acknowledge that his family's concerns had been legitimate. He was prepared, if necessary, to escalate this through channels that Paul Garrett should understand he had access to. Installed. He said all of this with the fluency of a man who had prepared his narrative in the elevator on the way up. He did not use the word assault. He did not use the word struck or slapped or hit. He said at one point that he had expressed his frustration physically in a way that he recognized may not have been appropriate, and he moved past it so quickly, buried it so deftly between two separate grievances about response time and professional tone, that a less careful listener might have missed it entirely. Paul Garrett was a careful listener. Colonel Voss, he said when the man had finished, I appreciate you laying that out for me. I need you to come with me to the conference room on this floor while I gather some additional information. I want the nurse reassigned first. I understand that's your preference. Please come with me. I don't think the hospital is taking this seriously. I can assure you we are taking it extremely seriously. Garrett stood. His voice had the quality of water that is completely calm on the surface and moving fast underneath. Please, come with me. Something in the delivery moved Voss. Not respect nothing in his posture, suggested respect for the man in front of him. But the recognition that the conversation had shifted into a register he didn't fully control. He stood, adjusted his jacket, and followed. In the hallway behind them, two security officers were already heading toward Bay 7 with a camera unit. Sandra Kulik had made that call 8 minutes ago. The afternoon changed the shape of things. Hospital Legal reviewed the security footage at 1:45. The attorney who watched it, a woman named Diane Cho, 49, who had seen a lot in 2 decades of healthcare law and had developed a face that didn't give much away, watched it twice, made 2 phone calls, and went to find the medical director. At 2:30, Garrett found Lauren in the medication prep room. Lauren, he stopped in the doorway. The footage confirms the incident as you described it. We're treating this as both a patient safety event and an employee assault. Legal is involved. Hospital security has documented everything. We need you to make sure you've been through occupationals. 1 o'clock with Dr. Perez. Documentation in the system. Incident report filed at 12:45. She was capping a syringe without looking up. I also documented the physician order number, the clinical rationale for the drip rate, and the full timeline of the interaction with Voss before I did anything else. Garrett was quiet for a moment. You did all of that while he was still on the floor filing complaints against you. I've been doing this for 11 years, Paul. He leaned against the doorframe. He looked at her cheek. He looked at her hands steady on the syringe, efficient, unhurried. He's claiming you were insubordinate and clinically negligent. I know. He has contacts. He made that clear. He implied there were people he could call who would. Call them, Lauren said. Not with heat. Just as a statement of fact, the way you say it's raining when it is in fact raining. She finally looked at him. The order was correct. The drip rate was correct. The documentation is complete and time-stamped. He struck me in front of his brother, and the security camera in Bay 7 captured all of it. She picked up the prepared medication. If he wants to call people, he should call them. I have a potassium check in room 7 at 3 o'clock. Garrett stepped aside. She walked him, passed him down the hall. Richard Voss spent the next 2 hours in the conference room at the end of the second floor, making phone calls in a lowered voice and occasionally coming to the doorway to ask for updates from whoever happened to be passing. His affect had shifted, not broken, not humble, but recalibrated into a colder register, the specific mode of a man who has decided that his initial approach isn't working and is assembling a more strategic one. He called someone he described only as a colleague at the Joint Base and had a 12-minute conversation that he believed was private, unaware that the hallway outside the conference room had a nurse's station 6 feet from the door and that the nurse staffing it had very good hearing and a very good memory. He came out at 4:10 and stood in the corridor, and for the first time since he had arrived, he looked like a man who was waiting instead of a man who was driving. Something about the hospital had stopped moving in response to him. The administrators he'd spoken to had become careful in a way they hadn't been at 11 o'clock. The supervisor who'd been attentive was now unavailable. Legal had gone quiet. The footage existed. He stood in the corridor and looked down toward the nursing station. Lauren was there. She was at a terminal, updating a chart. The bruise on her cheek was fully visible from 40 feet in the flat hospital, lighting purple-edged, clearly the result of significant impact, not something that could be explained away as an accident or a misunderstanding of physical space. He looked at her. She didn't look at him. She finished her charting, stood, and walked in the opposite direction toward Bay 4. At 4:17, the elevator at the end of the main corridor opened. Not security, not an administrator, not a pharmaceutical rep, or a consulting physician, or anyone else who belonged to the normal rhythm of the floor. 2 people stepped out, both in civilian clothing, but wearing it the way people wear clothing when they've spent long enough in uniform that nothing else ever sits quite right on them. The first was a woman in her mid-50s, silver-haired, compact, carrying a slim briefcase, moving with the unhurried precision of someone who is always exactly on time because she has already decided when she will arrive. The second was a man who appeared to be in his late 60s, broad-shouldered, with a face that had been rearranged by weather and time and possibly other things. He moved with a deliberateness that suggested he had already calculated the most efficient path across the floor before he stepped off the elevator. Why? They didn't go to the nursing station. They didn't ask for the charge nurse or the supervisor or the administrator on call. The man scanned the floor with eyes that moved in a systematic grid left to right, near to far. The specific sweep of someone trained to locate the relevant thing in a crowded environment, and then his gaze landed on Lauren Merritt, who was 40 feet away, pulling a chart outside Bay 4. He walked toward her. Lauren looked up when she heard the footsteps, not because she was startled, but because she had been expecting them. Not today necessarily, not at this specific time, but she had sent the message, and the message had always had a recipient, and the recipient had always been the kind of man who moved when something needed moving. Warrant Officer Terrence Holt, retired. Though the word retired sat on him the way a coat sits on a coat rack, technically there, technically functional, not really the point. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her face. At the bruise. At the shape of it, the particular geometry of an adult palm strike, which anyone who had been in the environments they had both been in would recognize immediately. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did a sharpening, a calculation, the specific internal movement of a man making a decision that he is going to be at peace with. Lauren, he said. Terrence, she said, you look like you've had a day. I've had worse. He almost smiled. I know. Behind him, the silver-haired woman had gone directly to the nursing station and was speaking quietly to Sandra Kulik. Sandra was listening with an expression Lauren had never seen on her face before total, unguarded attention. Whatever the woman was saying, Sandra had stopped what she was doing and was writing it down. Voss had come to the doorway of the conference room. He was watching the two arrivals with the expression of a man running a recalculation, still confident, but uncertain for the first time where the inputs were coming from. Who are they? He said, loud enough to carry, directed at no one in particular. No one answered him. Holt hadn't looked at him yet. He was still looking at Lauren. You waited 14 months. I didn't need to send it before. No, he agreed. You wouldn't. He glanced down at the phone, in his coat pocket, not checking it, just acknowledging something, and then looked back at her face. You document everything? Complete and time-stamped. Incident report, occupational health, security footage, physician order trail. Good, he said it quietly. Final, like a period. Then he turned. And for the first time, he looked at Richard Voss. It was not a dramatic look. It wasn't performed. It was simply a man turning his full attention toward another man, unhurried, unimpressed, completely without fear, and allowing that attention to be the entire communication. Voss straightened. I don't know who you are, but I'm in the middle of a formal complaint procedure involving a member of this hospital's nursing staff, and whatever you're here for, you need to speak with administration. Sit down, Colonel. 2 words. Quiet as a closed door. Voss stopped talking. Down the hall, the cardiac monitor in Bay 7 sends out its 3 o'clock tone Dale Carver's potassium check, due exactly on schedule. Lauren turned away from both men, tucked the chart under her arm, and walked toward Bay 7. Her patient needed her. Everything else could wait its turn. Dale Carver's potassium had dropped another 0.2 since the morning draw, which was not catastrophic, but was also not nothing. And Lauren documented it with the same quiet efficiency she'd brought to every task in the past 9 hours, while a bruise the size of a man's palm continued its slow evolution across her left cheekbone. She adjusted nothing without an order. She noted the value, flagged it in the system for Dr. Okafor, and stood at the bedside for a moment, checking the rhythm strip on the monitor, the waveform moving across the screen in its steady, imperfect, living way. Dale was watching her from the pillow. He'd been awake since the 3 o'clock check, and he had the look of a man who had been rehearsing something for a while and hadn't yet decided whether to say it. He said it. He wasn't always like that. Lauren didn't stop reading the strip. You don't have to explain him to me. I know. Dale pressed his mouth shut for a second. His hands were on the blanket, and they weren't still. He came to every one of my homecomings, both of them. He drove 6 hours for the first one and didn't tell anybody he was coming. Just showed up. He was quiet for a moment. I don't know when he turned into whatever that was. Lauren pulled the strip from the printer and clipped it to the chart. Sometimes the people who love you the most are the worst at showing it when they're scared. She looked at him directly. That doesn't make what he did acceptable. No, Dale said. It doesn't. She gave him a nod that was its own kind of acknowledgement, not absolution for his brother, not dismissal of his guilt, just the basic recognition that he'd said a true thing and she'd heard it. Then she left Bay 7 and went back into the corridor, where the floor had taken on the specific quality of a room in which everyone is performing normalcy while waiting for something to break. Terrence Holt was standing near the nursing station. He hadn't moved far from where she'd left him, which told her something about what he was doing. He was watching the floor the way she used to watch sectors, establishing the geometry, knowing where everyone was. The silver-haired woman, who had introduced herself to Sansantra as Margaret Foss, and whose briefcase had not been opened yet, was now seated in the family consultation room with the door slightly ajar. Through the gap, Lauren could see her on the phone, speaking in the low, unhurried cadences of someone who makes calls that require no persuasion, because the other party already knows they need to listen. Voss himself had retreated back to the conference room, but he hadn't closed the door all the way, and Every hadn't closed the door. So often Lauren caught the shape of him at the edge of it, standing, not sitting, too restless for the chair. He was working his phone hard. She could see the way his shoulders moved when he talked, the particular set of a man who is pulling on levers and checking whether they're connected to anything. Sandra appeared at Lauren's elbow with the practiced materialization of a charge nurse who has spent 2 decades moving between crises without drawing attention to the movement. Okafor wants a case update before she goes up to 5. Can you give her 10 minutes? After I check on room 9. Room 9 was checked by Diane 20 minutes ago. She's fine. Sandra lowered her voice, though her face stayed entirely professional. Holt, the man who came in, he asked me about the incident report, specifically the timestamp. What did you tell him? That it was filed at 12:45, which is 6 minutes after you left Bay 7 the first time. Sandra paused. He said, she hasn't changed. Lauren didn't respond to that. Should I be worried? Sandra asked. About Holt? No. Lauren picked up a chart from the rack. About what comes next? Probably a little. Dr. Okafor was in the physician workroom, standing rather than sitting, her stethoscope draped over the back of a chair she hadn't used. She had the kind of energy right now that suggested she'd been holding something at a controlled temperature, and the effort was starting to show. Potassium is 3.1, Lawrence said, coming in. I flagged it. His rhythm's been stable, but I'd want to watch the minus. I saw the flag. Okafor turned. I'm going to add an oral supplement. I'll put the order in now. She did 4 keystrokes, done. Then she turned fully toward Lauren. I had a conversation with the medical director at 2. How did that go? He's supportive, in the way administrators are supportive when the footage is clear and their attorney is worried. She said it without cynicism, but without illusion either. He wants Voss out of the building by end of shift. Security is prepared to escort him if he doesn't go voluntarily. He won't go voluntarily. No, Okafor agreed. I don't think he will either. She looked at Lauren's cheek with the clinical eye she couldn't quite turn off and the human eye she wasn't trying to. How are you? Working. That's not what I asked. Lauren considered the question the way she considered most things, briefly, honestly, without theater. I'm fine. My face hurts. I'm not rattled. She paused. I've been hit harder. She said it the same way she'd say, I've worked longer shifts or I've seen worse labs, as a simple statement of personal history. Okafor heard it the way it was offered, which was without drama, and something moved behind the doctor's eyes, a recalibration, the beginning of a question she didn't ask yet. The 2 people who came in, Okafor said, instead. Who are they? People who know me. From before. Lauren picked up the supplement order confirmation off the printer. I'm going to take this to pharmacy and then check in on room 9 before Sandra loses patience with me. Okafor let her go. But she stood in the workroom doorway and watched Lauren walk down the hall, and the look on her face was the look of someone assembling information that didn't yet fit any frame she currently had available. The next escalation came from a direction no one on the floor had anticipated. which was typically how the worst ones arrived. At 4:52, Colonel Voss's phone call produced results. The man he'd been calling the colleague at the Joint Base that the nurse at the station had overheard referenced turned out to be a brigadier general named Clifford Merritt, who had apparently decided, based on Voss's account of events, that this was a situation worth weighing in on. Merritt did not come to the hospital. What he did instead was call the hospital's main administrative line, ask for the medical director, and deliver in the courteous but unmistakable language of someone who considers their title a verb, a message suggesting that the situation involving Colonel Voss and the nursing staff ought to be handled with appropriate sensitivity to the colonel's service record and family circumstances. The medical director, Dr. Harold Spears, was 61 years old, had run Calvary Cross for 9 years, and had handled a great many things in that time with varying degrees of grace. He was not a coward, but he was also, not in this particular moment, entirely immune to the weight of a general on the phone. He called Paul Garrett. Garrett called Sandra. Sandra found Lauren at the medication cart at 5:07 and said, with the economy of someone who has learned to deliver bad news without decoration, "Spears wants a meeting. You, me, Garrett, the attorney, 5:30. He's gotten pressure from outside." Lauren's hands didn't stop what they were doing. From Voss's contacts, a general called. Of course he did. She checked the medication against the order, signed the log. Who else is in the meeting? Garrett said Voss will be there. Fine. Sandra was watching her. You're not going to. I'm going to finish this medication pass, check Dale Carver's potassium response in 20 minutes, and then go to the meeting. Lauren put the cart back into position. I'm not going to lose my composure in front of Richard Voss, if that's what you're asking. That's part of what I'm asking. What's the other part? Sandra was quiet for a moment. Are you actually okay? Not working okay? Actually. Lauren looked at her. Sandra Kulik was not a soft woman. She didn't ask that kind of question lightly, and she didn't ask it often. The fact that she was asking it now, in a corridor, during a shift, meant she meant it. I will be, Lauren said, which was honest, which was more than a lot of things she could have said. Sandra nodded once and walked back to the station. Terrence Holt was waiting outside the medication room when Lauren came out. He didn't approach her with urgency. He had never done anything with urgency in the years she'd known him, because urgency was what happened to people who hadn't prepared, and Holt had always prepared. Margaret is finishing a call, he said. What kind of call? The kind that makes certain people's phone calls to hospital administrators lose some of their weight. He fell into step beside her. A general reached out. I heard. He won't be reaching out again. Lauren glanced at him sideways. Who did Margaret call? People who have a clearer picture of your service record than a brigadier general in Harrisburg does. He paused. And people who have a somewhat less flattering picture of Colonel Voss's last 18 months. She absorbed that without comment. They walked in silence for a few steps. You built a good life here, Holt said. It wasn't a question. I tried to. You did. He looked down the corridor. You're good at this. I was good at the other thing too. Better, he said, without inflection. You were better at the other thing. That was always the problem. Lauren stopped outside Bay 7. Through the curtain, she could hear the soft, regular tone of Dale Carver's monitor his heart doing its imperfect, working, alive thing. It wasn't a problem. It was a choice, I know. Holt stopped beside her. I'm not arguing with the choice. I never was. He looked at the bruise on her face with the same expression he'd had when he first walked in, not pity, not anger, something harder and quieter than either. I'm just saying that whatever he thought he was hitting, he had no idea. She didn't answer that. She pulled the curtain and went in to check on her patient. The 5:30 meeting assembled in the second-floor conference room, the same room Voss had been occupying all afternoon, which meant it smelled faintly of his cologne and the particular atmosphere of a man who'd been making phone calls for hours. Present, Dr. Spears, Paul Garrett, Attorney Diane Cho, Lauren, Sandra, and Richard Voss, who arrived 40 seconds late and didn't apologize for it, which told everyone at the table something about his current calculation of the room. Margaret Foss arrived at the same moment as Voss and sat down next to Lauren without being invited and without explaining herself, which seemed to create a specific discomfort in Spears that he managed by shuffling papers he didn't need to shuffle. Holt did not come in. He stayed in the corridor. Spears opened. He was professional. He acknowledged the seriousness of the incident, noted the footage and the documentation, expressed the hospital's commitment to employee safety, and was in the process of pivoting toward the language of resolution and moving forward when Voss leaned forward and cut through it. "I want to be clear about something," Voss said. "My actions in Bay 7 were a response to a pattern of behavior from that nurse. He used that nurse with the deliberateness of a man who refuses to acknowledge personhood in his opponents. That represented a clear of patient care. My brother is a veteran receiving substandard treatment, and when I attempted to address it, she became confrontational, and I reacted." "You struck her," Diane Cho said. "I made physical contact in the context of a heated exchange." "The footage shows an open-handed strike to her face, Colonel." "That's what the footage shows." Voss's jaw tightened slightly. "The footage shows a moment taken out of context." "What context changes what the footage shows?" Cho said it without heat, which made it land harder than heat would have. Voss turned to Spears. "I've been in contact with General Merritt, who I think has already spoken with this hospital's administration regarding the appropriate mindset." "General Merritt won't be pursuing that further," Margaret Foss said. "She said it, the way you say it's 4:30, or the building is on the corner, with the complete flatness of a person conveying a fact, not an opinion, not a threat, just a thing that is currently true." Voss looked at her. "Who are you?" Margaret Foss. She didn't offer anything else. She had the briefcase on the table in front of her, still closed. General Merritt was provided with some additional context about this situation. He decided to redirect his attention. The room was quiet in a new way. The previous quiet had been the quiet of people being professionally careful. This was the quiet of people recalculating. "What additional context?" Voss said. "I'm not in a position to discuss that here." Voss looked at him steadily. "What I can tell you is that the call to this administration was made without a full understanding of the circumstances, and General Merritt recognized that once he had that full understanding." Voss's eyes moved to Lauren. Something in them had shifted, not broken, not yet, but the absolute certainty that had been there at 11 o'clock this morning had developed a hairline crack. Lauren was looking at the table, not submissively, not avoiding. She was simply the most still person in the room, the way still water is distinct from frozen water, not stopped, just deep. "My brother's care," Voss said finally, redirecting. "That's what this started over. His care has been. His care has been exemplary," Dr. Okafor said. Nobody had noticed her in the doorway. She came in without waiting for an invitation. It was, Lauren thought, one of the things she liked about Okafor. She moved through rooms the way she moved through rounds, without asking permission from the room. "I reviewed Dale Carver's chart, every order and every nursing note, beginning from admission. The IV rate Nurse Merritt was maintaining was not only appropriate, adjusting it upward the way you requested would have carried a meaningful risk of acute pulmonary edema given his current ejection fraction. She was protecting your brother." Okafor sat down. She had a folder. She put it on the table. She was doing her job correctly, and she was struck for it. Voss said nothing. "I'd like that to be clearly in the record," Okafor said to Spears. "That the clinical decision being contested was correct. That the nursing care was not at fault. That needs to be the documented institutional position before this meeting ends." Spears looked at Garrett. Garrett looked at Cho. Cho looked at her notepad and wrote something. "Agreed," Spears said. The word came out slightly strained, like it had been waiting in line for a while, but it came out. The meeting ended without resolution and without Voss conceding anything, which was how Lauren had expected it to end. Concession wasn't in him, not here, not today, possibly not ever. What the meeting had done was establish a set of facts in a room with witnesses and a note-taker, and that was worth something regardless of what Voss said or didn't say. He left the conference room ahead of everyone else without speaking again. In the corridor, he pulled out his phone. Lauren came out behind him, and for a moment they were in the same hallway, 6 feet apart, and Voss turned and looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him, yet not rage, not contempt, but something more considered. The look of a man reassessing his terrain. "You think you've won something," he said. She looked at him. "I think your brother's potassium is 3.1, and I need to check whether the supplement dose is moving it." She walked past him. Behind her, she heard him exhale a short, controlled breath that was trying to be dismissive, and landing about 6 inches short. Dale Carver's potassium at the 6:30 check was 3.4. Moving. Lauren documented it, did a quick rhythm strip, saw nothing alarming, and stood for a moment at the bedside, in the way she sometimes allowed herself, when a patient was stable and the floor was briefly not on fire. Dale was awake. He'd been awake more than he'd been asleep all day. "Was that my brother in the meeting?" he asked. "There was a meeting." "Yes. Did he—" Dale stopped, recalibrated. "Is he still here?" "I believe so. Yes." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the ceiling. "He filed a formal complaint about you before I woke up this morning. I didn't know until one of the other nurses said something." He swallowed. "I want you to know I didn't ask him to. I wouldn't have asked him to." "I know," Lauren said. "He thought he was helping." "That's," Dale's voice caught at the edge. "That's the thing. He always thinks he's helping. He was the same way when we were kids. He'd fight somebody for you and then wonder why you weren't grateful." His hands worked the edge of the blanket. "I don't know how to explain him. I've been trying my whole life." "You don't have to explain him to me," Lauren said for the second time. "You have to rest and let the supplement do its work, and I'll be back at 9 to check your levels again." "Will you?" He stopped. "Never mind." "What?" He looked at her directly. It was the look of someone who has been sick and frightened and, witnessed something he didn't know what to do with. "Will you still be my nurse tomorrow? Or is he going to—" "I'll be here," Lauren said. She said it the same way she said everything, without flourish, without sentimentality. Just as a fact about the future that she intended to make true. He left the bay and was 3 steps into the corridor when Sandra appeared from the direction of the elevator bay, moving at a pace that was not quite running, because Sandra Kulik did not run on the floor, but it was the fastest Lauren had ever seen her walk, and her face had done something it almost never did. It had gone uncertain. "Lauren." Sandra reached her and stopped. "You need to come to the front corridor." "What happened?" Sandra took a breath that was shorter than her usual breaths. 3 more people just came off the elevator. Lauren waited. 2 of them are in uniform, Sandra said. Full dress. One of them is wearing stars. Lauren felt something shift in her chest. Not fear. Not quite. Something older than fear. The specific internal register of a person who has lived in 2 very different worlds and has just felt them move toward each other. "How many stars?" she said. Sandra looked at her with the expression of someone delivering information they don't entirely understand. 4. The hallway felt different under Lauren's feet as she turned and walked toward the front corridor, not longer, not shorter, just different. The way certain distances feel different when you know what's waiting at the end of them. Around the corner, past the secondary nursing station, past the supply room and the family lounge where Voss had spent the afternoon making calls, the corridor opened into the wider receiving area near the elevator bank. And there they were, 3 people, 2 in full dress uniform army, not Navy, though that registered as a secondary detail. The 3rd in civilian clothes that fit him the way Holtz did, which was to say imperfectly and unmistakably. The uniformed figures had the bearing of people who have attended enough formal occasions that standing at attention in a hospital hallway is simply a resting state. The one in front was a woman, compact, 50-something, silver eagles on her shoulders. No, not eagles. Stars. 4 of them. 4 stars on the shoulders of a woman who was looking down the corridor toward Lauren, with the expression of someone who came here for a specific purpose and is now confirming that the specific purpose is in the room. Terrence Holt was standing 2 feet to her left. He'd moved from his position near the nursing station. He was looking at Lauren with an expression that was very close to the expression he'd had years ago in a very different when he'd told her that what she'd done had mattered in a way that wouldn't be put in any official record anywhere. Lauren stopped walking. The 4-star stopped walking. And Richard Voss, who had come around the corner from the family lounge with his phone in his hand and a fresh complaint half formed on his face, came to a full, complete, statue-still halt when he saw the stars on the woman's shoulders, because there are exactly 5 people in the United States Army who wear 4 stars, and a man who has spent his career building his identity around his own rank understands in his body, before he understands in his brain, what 4 stars means in a room. His phone dropped to his side. The 4-star general looked at Lauren Merritt, at the bruise on her face, at her scrubs, at the way she was standing in the hallway of this hospital at 6:47 in the evening after a 9-hour shift on her feet, and she said, in a voice that carried without being raised, "I need to speak with Nurse Merritt, privately, now." Nobody moved, nobody breathed, and somewhere down the corridor, behind a curtain in Bay 7, Dale Carver's cardiac monitor kept its steady, living rhythm, indifferent to everything, faithful to nothing except the next beat and the one after that. The family consultation room on the 2nd floor was 12 feet by 14, furnished with a round table, 4 chairs upholstered in the specific shade of muted blue that hospital designers apparently believed communicated calm, a box of tissues that nobody touched, and a window that looked out over the parking structure. It was the room where physicians told families things they didn't want to hear, and it carried that history in the air, the way certain rooms do not haunted, just waited. General Patricia Wynne sat down across from Lauren, without ceremony and without preamble. She set nothing on the table. She folded her hands. She looked at Lauren's face, at the bruise, which had deepened through the afternoon into something that photographed clearly and hurt in the specific way that blunt facial trauma hurts, a pressure that professionally announced it that lived behind the cheekbone and announced itself every time Lauren's jaw moved, and she held that look for 3 full seconds before she said anything. "Tell me what happened. Your words, your sequence." Terrence Holt had positioned himself near the door. He wasn't in the conversation. He was in the room the way a load-bearing wall is in a room structurally present, not decorative. Lauren told it, the same way she'd told it to Sandra, to Okafor, to Garrett. The same concision, the same sequence, the same absence of embellishment. She had told professionally. She had told this story enough times today that she could have delivered it in her sleep. And she told it now without inflection and without the particular exhaustion that should have been creeping in after 11 hours on her feet, because something about the woman across from her made the exhaustion irrelevant for the moment. Wynne listened without interrupting. When Lauren finished, she was quiet for 4 or 5 seconds, which was longer than most people could manage after hearing what Lauren had just described. "Your documentation is complete," Wynne said. It was not a question. Yes. Incident report, occupational health, full nursing notes with timestamps, physician order trail from admission. All of it. Filed before the administrative meeting at 5:30. Wynne nodded once. Something in the nod said she had expected this answer, since the answer come confirmed something she'd brought with her into the room. "Lauren, I need to tell you some things, and I need you to hear them in the order I give them." Lauren waited. "The first thing is that what happened to you today is being taken seriously at a level above this hospital's administrative structure. That is not a courtesy. That is not a gesture. It is a consequence of who you are and what you did before you came here. And it would be happening regardless of whether Terrence had reached out to me. Because there are people who have kept track of you. Wynne paused. Whether you wanted them to or not. I didn't, Lauren said. Plainly, not with resentment. Just true. I know. We did it anyway. Wynne's expression didn't apologize for this. The second thing is that Colonel Voss's contact the general who called this hospital has been fully briefed. The call will not be followed up. That line of pressure is closed. Margaret Voss mentioned that in the meeting. Good. That's what Margaret does. Wynne's hands remained folded on the table. The third thing is harder. Lauren said nothing. She had learned a long time ago that when someone tells you the next thing is harder, the correct response is to wait, not to brace. Your service record, Wynne said. The real one. Not the version that exists in standard personnel files. She paused. It's going to be part of what happens next. I want you to know that before it happens. Because I don't want you to feel like it's being used without your knowledge. It is your record. It is your history. But it is going to be in the room, and it is going to change what this situation looks like to everyone in this building. Lauren was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the parking structure lights had come on the automatic response to the dying October light, yellow-white, and indifferent. How much of it? She asked. Enough, Wynne said. In the corridor outside, Richard Voss had not moved far. He'd been asked firmly by a hospital security officer and by Paul Garrett simultaneously to wait in the family lounge. And he had agreed to this in the way that a man agrees to something when the alternative is being physically escorted. And he's calculating that the optics of physical escort are worse than the optics of compliance. He sat in the lounge with his phone and his composure, and he worked both of them. His attorney was now on the phone. A real one, not a military jag, but a private attorney in D.C., who had handled difficult situations for difficult people before, and who was, from the sound of the half-conversation audible through the lounge doorway, currently receiving information that was making him cautious in a way that Voss hadn't fully anticipated. Voss kept his voice low. He kept his posture controlled. But the man who had walked into Bay 7 at 11:40 this morning, with the absolute conviction of someone who has never seriously considered that he might be wrong, was, by 7:15 in the evening, doing something Voss did not do naturally or gracefully. He was recalculating, not conceding, not collapsing. Recalculating the specific survival-oriented mental activity of a person who has hit a wall and is now looking for the door. The problem was that the wall kept getting taller. At 7:20, a man in the uniform of an Army Criminal Investigation Division special agent came off the elevator and went directly to the nursing station. He spoke to Sandra Kulik for approximately 90 seconds. Sandra pointed toward Bay 7. He went there, spent 4 minutes inside, came out, and then walked to the family lounge doorway and looked at Voss. Voss looked back. Colonel Voss, the agent said, I'm Special Agent Dennis Rafferty, Army PsyD. I need to speak with you. Voss stood. He did not put the phone away immediately. The attorney's voice was still audible from it, saying something careful, and Voss listened to 3 more words before ending the call and sliding the phone into his pocket. About what, Voss said. He knew about what. About the incident in Bay 7 at approximately 11:40 this morning. We've received a referral. Rafferty held the doorway. He was mid-30s, unremarkable in the specific way that CID agents cultivate unremarkableness. If you'd come with me, we can use a room. I'm already involved in an administrative process with this hospital. I understand that. This is a separate process. Rafferty's voice carried no pressure. It didn't need to. The two can run concurrently, Colonel. The word concurrently landed with more weight than its syllables should have allowed. Because what Voss heard, what a man with his experience and his career absolutely understood, was that the military had opened its own inquiry. Not a hospital HR matter, not a civil complaint, a military investigation. and that meant his rank was no longer the ceiling of this situation. It was part of what was being examined. He went with Rafferty. Lauren came out of the consultation room at 7:35 to find the floor had rearranged itself. The CID agent was in a room with Voss. Margaret Voss was at the nursing station, with a laptop open and a phone wedged between her shoulder and her ear. Holt was where Holt always was, peripheral, oriented, watching the geometry. Two uniformed officers who had come in with General Wynne were standing near the elevator with the posture of people who are waiting for something specific and know exactly how long they're willing to wait. Sandra materialized beside Lauren within 15 seconds. CD's here, Sandra said. I saw. They interviewed Dale Carver 10 minutes ago. Brief 5 questions. He was cooperative. Sandra lowered her voice further. He told them his brother hit you, unprompted. He said he wanted it in the record. Lauren observed this. It was not nothing. A family member's testimony in a CID inquiry offered voluntarily without prompting, that was not nothing. How is he doing? Lauren asked. Clinically. His potassium was 3.6 at the 7 o'clock check. Diane did it. He's stable. Sandra paused. He asked for you. I'll go in after I. Lauren. Sandra touched her arm, which was notable because Sandra almost never touched anyone. Go now. The rest can wait 3 minutes. Lauren went. Bay 7 was quieter than the rest of the floor. The monitor maintained its rhythm. Dale had his bed elevated to about 30 degrees and was looking at the curtain. When Lauren came in looking at it, the way people look at things they're not seeing, their eyes just needing somewhere to land. He turned when he heard her footstep. Your potassium is better, she said. I know, the other nurse told me. He was quiet for a moment. I talked to the investigators. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. He said it with flatness that wasn't cold. It was the flatness of someone who has made a decision they're not going to revisit. He hit you. I was 3 feet away. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't. He looked at the bruise on her face with an expression that had something raw in it. Does it hurt? Yes, Lauren said. She didn't see the point in lying about basic physical reality. Something in his face contracted and then released. He'll come up with a reason. He always comes up with a reason. I love my brother, but he's been coming up with reasons for things his whole life. He shook his head against the pillow. Who's the general? The woman with someone who knew me before I came here. Dale looked at her. Really looked the way sick people sometimes look at you when they've run out of the energy required to maintain social filters. What did you do before you came here? Lauren checked his IV line, checked the pump reading, documented the rate in the chart she was holding. I was a medic, she said. He waited for more. She didn't give him more. Okay, he said finally, and left it there. She was at the curtain when he said, thank you, for not changing the drip rate. Even when he stopped. Thank you. Get some sleep, she said. Your heart is working. Let it. The escalation that nobody had predicted came at 8:47. It did not come from Voss. It did not come from legal or administration or the CID inquiry that was still running in a room at the end of the hall. It came from Dale Carver's monitor, which at 8:46 had been showing a normal sinus rhythm with the occasional early beat that had been there since admission and was documented, accounted for, and being watched. At 8:47, it stopped showing that. The tone that came out of the monitor was not the 3 o'clock potassium check tone. It was the other tone, the one that cuts like through a hospital floor, the way a fire alarm cuts through a building, the one that nobody mistakes for anything else, the one that is designed to move bodies toward a location immediately and without deliberation. Lauren was at the nursing station. She was moving before the second beat of the alarm, not running, because running on a hospitable floor means collisions and dropped equipment and lost seconds, but walking at the pace that is functionally a run without the liability of being one. And she was through the curtain of Bay 7 and 11 seconds with Diane Ferraro, the other floor nurse, 6 steps behind her. The monitor showed ventricular tachycardia, VTach, heart rate 214. Dale Carver was conscious. His eyes were open, and he was looking at the ceiling with an expression that said his body was telling him something was wrong, and he didn't entirely understand what but conscious. VTAC at that rate was a countdown, not a reprieve. Dale. Lauren was at the bedside. I need you to stay with me. Do you hear me? Something. His voice was wrong. Thinner than before. My chest feels. I know. We're here. She had her fingers on his wrist. Carotid would come next. She needed the rate and was already reaching for the crash cart handle with her other hand. Diane, get Dr. Okafor now. Code Blue Bay 7. Get the cart open. Diane was already on the phone. VTAC with a pulse was not the same as VFib, which was the thing that killed you in under 4 minutes. VTAC with a pulse gave you a window. The window was not long, and it was not guaranteed, and it depended on rate and duration, and the underlying cardiac function, and Dale Carver's underlying cardiac function was already compromised, which was why the drip rate had mattered, which was why Lauren had refused to change it, which was why Richard Voss had struck her across the face. All of that was irrelevant now. What was relevant was the next 60 seconds. Lidocaine, Lauren said to Diane, who was already pulling the crash cart, already finding the drawer. And get me the pads on him now. She was talking to Dale while she did it. Not constantly, not the running reassurance patter that some nurses use, and that Lauren had always found slightly performative, just enough. His name, his eyes, a specific directive every 15 seconds that required him to respond, and in responding, confirmed he was still with her. Dale, look at me. Good. Stay right there. The pads went on. Rate still 214. His systolic was dropping. She could see it on the monitor, could feel it in the quality of his pulse under her fingers. 78. 71. The window was getting shorter. Dr. Okafor came through the curtain at a pace that was barely controlled. She took in the monitor, the pads, the cart, and Lauren's position in one sweep. How long? 90 seconds. Rate? Started at 214. Currently 209. Systolic is 71 and dropping. Synchronized cardio version. Agreed. They did not argue. They did not deliberate. They had the specific efficiency of two people who have both trained for this moment in different contexts and who recognize, without having to say it, that the other person knows what they're doing. Dale, Okafor said, putting her hand briefly on his forearm. We're going to correct your heart rhythm. This will feel like a strong shock. It will be fast. I need you to hold still. He looked at her. His eyes were scared in the clear, honest way that adults are scared when the fear is warranted, and pretending otherwise would be absurd. Okay, he said. His voice was very thin. Sedation, Okafor said, and Lauren already had the midazolam drawn. The dose went in. 30 seconds for it to take enough edge off, not full unconsciousness, not at this rate, just enough. The defibrillator charged. Lauren had her hand on the controls. She'd done this before. Not in a hospital in a different context, in a different location, in a different kind of room with different equipment, and the same human stakes. Her hands were steady because they had always been steady, because whatever Lauren Merritt was, or had been, or had done, her hands did not shake when it mattered. Clear. Everyone stepped back. She delivered the shock. The monitor flatlined for 1 full second, the artificial pause that always felt longer than it was, and then the waveform returned. Slower, regular, sinus rhythm rate 88. Systolic climbing 84-91. Dale Carver's eyes were still open. He was breathing. He looked like a man who had just been hit by something he didn't entirely understand, which was physically accurate. Rhythms restored, Lauren said, not triumphantly, just as information. Okafor was at the monitor, watching the strip, her hand on Dale's wrist. Good output. He's perfusing. She watched for another 10 seconds. Good. Okay. She let out a breath that was not quite steady. Good. In the corridor outside the curtain, Lauren could hear the sounds of the floor that had gathered in response to the code other nurses, the rapid footstep of the response team arriving 30 seconds behind the curve, the diminishment of urgency as word traveled that the rhythm was back. Hospitals had their own communication system, faster than any intercom, and the news that a code had resolved moved through a floor in under a minute. Okafor began giving post-conversion orders. Dale needed monitoring at a higher level step-down at minimum, possibly the cardiac ICU for the night. He needed continuous telemetry, a repeat electrolyte panel, cardiology in the morning for a formal evaluation. Lauren documented everything as Okafor spoke. Time of onset, rate and rhythm, intervention, time of conversion, current rate and rhythm, systolic at each interval. Every number, every second, every decision in the sequence recorded with the precision she'd been trained to apply in conditions that made this hospital look forgiving. When Okafor finished the orders and stepped back from the bedside, she looked at Lauren with an expression that was layered and complicated and not entirely appropriate for the clinical setting, which was why she didn't voice most of it. "Nice work," she said. Lauren was still writing. "You too." By 9:15, Dale Carver was being transferred to the step-down unit on the 3rd floor with a portable telemetry pack, a nursing handoff document that Lauren had written in 6 minutes and that contained everything anyone needed to continue his care, and an IV line that was running at exactly the rate it had been running at 11:40 this morning. Richard Voss was in the corridor when the bed came through. He'd come out of the CID interview room, which had ended 30 minutes ago, and which had not, from the look on his face, gone the way he'd hoped. He was standing near the elevator with his phone in his hand and the expression of a man who has been doing this all day and is running low on the internal resource that makes doing it possible. He saw the bed. He saw Dale, his brother, pale and wired with leads and frightened and alive. Something moved across Voss's face that was complicated and human and had nothing to do with rank or strategy. It was just a brother looking at his brother. He took a step toward the bed. Lauren, walking alongside it, put her hand up, not aggressively, not dramatically. Just a hand raised in the universal language of stop. Voss stopped. "He's going to the step-down unit," she said. "He had a cardiac event 40 minutes ago. He's stable, but he needs quiet and he needs rest. You can see him in the morning, during visiting hours after the cardiologist has evaluated him." She looked at Voss with the complete directness of someone who stopped being afraid of him sometime around 11:45 this morning. "Do you understand?" Voss looked at his brother. Dale was looking at the ceiling, not at Voss, with the deliberate non-engagement of someone who has decided to let other people manage the situation around him for now. "Is he?" Voss's voice was different, stripped of the command register. Just a man asking about his brother. "Is he okay?" "He will be," Lauren said, "if he rests." The implication was not subtle. Voss took it without the bristle she might have expected from him 8 hours ago. He stepped back. The bed continued past him toward the elevator. Lauren followed it without looking back. She didn't look back at Voss. She didn't look back at the floor, at the nursing station, at the consultation room, where General Wynne was on the phone, at Terrence Holt, who was still doing his load-bearing wall impression near the fire door. She looked at Dale Carver, at the waveform on the portable monitor clipped to the side rail, at the IV line running at the rate she'd held against a colonel's open hand, at the number that said his heart was beating and his pressure was holding and he was going to wake up tomorrow. In the step-down unit, the handoff took 11 minutes. The receiving nurse, a compact, quick-eyed man named Troy Danes, who Lauren knew from 3 years of overlap, read the handoff document with the focused speed of someone who knows what matters and what doesn't, asked 2 targeted questions, got 2 complete answers, and nodded. "Good catch on the VTAC," Troy said. "Monitor caught it," Lauren said. "We just moved fast. That's the job," she said. "That's the job." She took the stairs back down to the 2nd floor. 11 flights was 6. She'd always done the math wrong in that building, and tonight she didn't care. She needed the stairs. She needed the specific, stupid, muscular reality of climbing them, The way the burn in her thighs was just a physical fact and not a decision or a consequence or a testimony. She came through the stairwell door onto the second floor at 9:41 and found the floor different than she'd left it. Not quieter, actually noisier, in the specific way of a floor where something has shifted in the information landscape and people are reacting to the shift. Two nurses she didn't recognize were talking near the supply room door. The administrator on call, a woman named Rosalind Park, who Lauren had interacted with maybe 3 times in 3 years, was at the nursing station with a folder and an expression of active management. Sandra found her within 30 seconds. Wynne and her people went to the administrator's office, Sandra said. 20 minutes ago. Took Garrett and Spears with them. She paused. And Cho, the attorney, all of them, together. Sandra's expression was doing something Lauren couldn't immediately classify. Rafferty, the CID agent, left the building with Voss. Lauren went still, with him, not in handcuffs, but Voss wasn't leading the walk. Sandra looked at her steadily. Lauren, what did you do before you came here? It was the second time tonight someone had asked her that question, and this time Lauren didn't have a cardiac emergency to move toward instead of answering it. I was a medic, she said again. What kind of medic? The kind that doesn't get discussed in hospital corridors. The kind whose records lived in filing systems that most physicians and nursing supervisors and charge nurses didn't have clearance to access. The kind that explained why a woman could absorb a blow from a decorated Army colonel and stand back up without flinching and send a 4-word text message and go back to her patients because standing back up and going back to work was not courage. It was just training. And she'd had more of it than anyone on this floor knew. The kind that matters, Lauren said. Sandra looked at her for a long moment. She had the expression of a woman who has worked 22 years in a field that shows you the full spectrum of what people are, and who has just recalibrated her assessment of one of them significantly. The general, Sandra said. She knows you. Yes. From before. Yes. And the other 2 people, Holt and the Foss woman. Yes. Sandra processed this. She was a practical woman. She didn't require narration. She assembled facts the way you assemble a treatment plan from what you have toward what you need. Are you in trouble? No, Lauren said. I don't think I'm in trouble. Are you something? Sandra pressed. Something that I should know about in terms of... I'm a nurse. Lauren said it with the flat, total sincerity of someone saying, this floor is made of concrete, or the monitor is showing sinus rhythm. I am a nurse, Sandra. That's what I am now. That's what I came here to be. Sandra held the look for another second. Then she exhaled through her nose the Sandra Kulik version of standing down. Okay, she said. Okay. The door to the stairwell opened behind them. Terrence Holt came through it from below, not above, which meant he'd been on a different floor. He was moving with slightly more purpose than his usual deliberate pace, and he had his phone in his hand, screen lit. He looked at Lauren. You need to come upstairs, he said. Step down is on 3. I just came from not the step down unit. He held her gaze. Administrator's office. 5th floor. Lauren looked at him. He was not a man who manufactured urgency. He didn't use expressions like you need to casually or for effect. Why? She said. Holt glanced at Sandra not unkindly, but with the clear communication that what he was about to say was not for the hallway. Then he looked back at Lauren. Because Margaret just opened the briefcase, he said, and General Wynne is laying your full service record on Spears' desk right now, and Voss is in the room, and when he reads what's in that file. Holt paused, and the first time all day Lauren saw something in his face that was not controlled. Something that had weight and history, and a particular pride that he hadn't planned to show. He needs to hear it from you, Holt said. Not from paper. From you. Lauren looked at the floor for 1 second. 1 full second of just standing there in the hallway of a hospital she had chosen deliberately 3 years ago, for reasons that had everything to do with who she wanted to be and nothing to do with who she'd been. Then she walked toward the elevator. She pressed 5. The doors closed. And in the administrator's office above her, a briefcase was open on a desk, and a file was laid flat. And Richard Voss was looking at a photograph of a woman in combat gear in a location that would not be named in any document that ever left a classified server. A woman with her hands covered in someone else's blood, standing over a man she had just pulled from burning wreckage, her face the same face that he had struck across the cheek at 11:40 this morning in Bay 7 of Calvary Cross Medical Center. The elevator moved upward. Lauren Merritt looked at her own reflection in the steel doors. The bruise on her cheek had gone fully dark purple-black at the center, yellowing at the edges, the kind of mark that photographs for weeks. She looked at it the way she looked at everything, directly, without flinching. The elevator reached the 5th floor. The doors opened, and at the end of the corridor, the administrator's office door was not quite closed. And through the gap came the specific quality of silence that falls over a room when the people inside it have just been shown something that changes the shape of everything they thought they understood. And Richard Voss's voice, barely controlled, saying 4 words that Lauren heard clearly from 15 feet away before she reached the door, "That can't be her." Lauren pushed the door open. The administrator's office was larger than the consultation room downstairs, but felt smaller because of what was in it. Dr. Spears behind his desk, looking like a man who has just been handed a document that recontextualized his entire day. Paul Garrett, standing near the window with his arms crossed and his face doing the careful thing it did when he was processing something faster than he wanted to show. Diane Cho, with her legal pad, pen down, not writing, just reading. Margaret Foss at the side table with the briefcase open, and a series of documents laid out in a sequence that was clearly deliberate. General Wynne standing near the desk, not sitting, the kind of standing that establishes the center of a room without requiring any words to do it. And Richard Voss, seated not because anyone had offered him a chair, but because his legs had apparently decided independently that standing was no longer available to them. He was leaning forward with his elbows on his knees and the photograph in his hands, and he was looking at it with the specific expression of a man whose entire morning has just been rewritten in a language he didn't know existed. He looked up when Lauren came in. She watched him look at her face, the bruise, the same face as the photograph, the same eyes, and watched the moment when his brain completed the connection his mouth had just refused to make. That can't be her. He'd said it before she'd opened the door. He was now confronting the fact that it was. Nobody spoke for a moment. Lauren crossed to the empty chair on the far side of the desk and sat down. She didn't look at the photograph in Voss's hands. She didn't need to. She knew exactly which one it was, the one taken in the 3rd deployment, 6 weeks before extraction, in a location she had spent 3 years successfully not thinking about. She was covered in dust and someone else's blood, and she was looking directly at the camera with the expression she'd been told. Later looked like indifference, but was actually the specific blankness of a person running on. Adrenaline and protocol and the absolute refusal to stop. For the record, General Wynne said to the room, to everyone, in the measured cadence of someone establishing a permanent fact, Nurse Lauren Merritt served for 9 years as a Special Operations Combat medic attached to classified Joint Task Force units. She completed 4 deployments in high-risk environments. She received the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Bronze Star with Valor Device, and 2 commendations for medical performance under direct enemy contact. Wynne paused. She saved the lives of 11 operators across her deployments, including, in her final year of service, a senior warrant officer whose extraction under fire is documented in the classified annexes of the file on this desk. The room held that information. Spears was looking at Lauren as though she had just become a different size. Garrett was no longer doing the careful face. He was just looking, openly, the way people look when they've run out of the professional composure required to conceal a genuine reaction. Voss was still holding the photograph. She left the service 3 years ago, Wynne continued. By her own choice, through proper discharge procedures with full honors. She took a civilian nursing position. She has, in this hospital for the past 3 years, performed her duties at a standard that her charge nurse, her supervising physician, and this institution's own records confirm without ambiguity. Wynne looked at Voss directly. This morning, Colonel, she maintained a correct clinical order that protected your brother's cardiac function, and you struck her for it. Voss set the photograph on the desk. He set it down carefully, which was somehow worse than if he dropped it. I didn't know. That's the point, Wynne said. You didn't know. You didn't ask. You looked at a nurse and decided what she was, and you acted on that decision. Her voice hadn't risen. It didn't need to. The fact that you were wrong about her history doesn't change what you did to her face, Colonel. And it doesn't change the fact that even if she had been exactly what you assumed, a floor nurse with no background beyond her training, you would still have committed an assault in a patient care area. The silence that followed was the kind that fills rooms completely. Voss looked at Lauren. She was watching him with the same expression she'd had at 11:40 this morning. Not cold, not triumphant, not anything that required a name. Just direct, just present. I owe you an apology, he said. It came out awkwardly. Not insincere. She didn't think it was insincere. But Voss was a man who had probably said, I was wrong fewer than 15 times in his adult life, and each one of them had cost him something, and this one was costing him considerably more than the others. Lauren looked at him for a moment. Your brother coded tonight, she said. Ventricular tachycardia. We cardioverted him at 8:50. He's in the step-down unit now, with continuous telemetry and a cardiology consult in the morning. She held his gaze. The drip rate I was maintaining this morning was part of why his electrolytes were stable enough that the event was survivable and reversible. I want you to understand that. Not for me, for him. Voss said nothing, but something in him, something structural, something that had been load-bearing in his posture, all day shifted, not collapsed, just shifted the way a building settles when the pressure redistributes. Your apology, Lauren said, is noted. She didn't say accepted. She didn't say rejected, just noted, which was its own complete sentence, its own complete verdict. What came next was not clean. It was the necessary, grinding, procedurally mandated work of consequence, which is almost never clean. Special Agent Rafferty came back at 10:15 with a second PsyD investigator and a document that Voss's civilian attorney reviewed in the hallway outside Spears's office for 11 minutes before coming back in and telling Voss, in the lowered voice of a man delivering bad news he'd seen coming since the footage review, that the military criminal charges were going to proceed. Assault consummated by a battery. Conduct unbecoming an officer. 2 separate charges, 2 separate processes. The military investigation running parallel to the civil matter that the Harrisburg DA's office had been notified of 2 hours ago by hospital legal. Voss sat through the reading of the charges, with his hands flat on his thighs, and his face doing the controlled thing, the containing thing, the thing he'd clearly trained himself to do in situations that threatened to exceed what he could manage publicly. He was still in his uniform. His ribbons were still aligned. He looked like what he was, a decorated officer, and also like what he had become in the last 12 hours, which was a man whose next 6 months were going to be defined by the 11 seconds of footage from Base N7. Lauren was not in the room when the formal charges were read. She was at the nursing station on the 2nd floor, doing end-of-shift documentation, because her shift had technically ended at 6, and it was now closing on 11, and she had charts to close and notes to finalize and a handoff to the night nurse to complete. And none of the things happening in the administrator's office on the 5th floor changed any of that. Sandra sat next to her while she charted, not hovering just present, the way Sandra was sometimes just present, a companionable weight in the adjacent chair. Voss's attorney came down and asked for a copy of Dale's chart, Sandra said. I told him to submit a formal records request. Good. He wasn't happy about that. He doesn't have to be. Lauren finished a note and moved to the next field. What did legal say about the record's request timeline? Cho's office said they'd respond within the statutory window, which is not 3 minutes, no matter how many times the attorney rephrases the ask. Sandra paused. She's good, Cho. She is. Sandra watched her chart for a moment. The general is still upstairs. She'll be there a while. She keeps asking about you. Sandra searched for the right word. Not in a surveillance way. Just checking. Lauren saved the note. Open the next. She does that. She's known you a long time. Long enough, Sandra let the silence run for a bit, which was its own form of communication with Sandra. Then the other nurses on the floor tonight, Diane, Marcus, the evening crew. They all know what happened, not the full background. But they know he hit you, and they know you didn't stop working. She paused again. Marcus said he's never seen anything like it. He's been doing this 8 years. Lauren did not respond to that. She moved through the charting with the same Sammenfassung, and she did not warten, with the same steady rot to everything. And she did not think about what Marcus had or hadn't seen, because thinking about what other people thought of you was the kind of thing that had a place, but that place was not the middle of end-of-shift documentation. She closed the final chart at 11:20. She sat back. For the first time since 5:58 this morning, she had nothing immediately in front of her that required action. The floor was being handed off. Dale Carver was monitored and stable 3 floors up. The charges were filed. The file was open on Spears's desk. She sat in the chair at the nursing station and felt the fatigue arrive not suddenly, because it had been building all day beneath the surface of the work, but fully now that the work had stopped making structural demands on it. Her face throbbed. Her feet had moved past pain into the distant numbness that comes after hour 15. Her lower back had a specific complaint that she noted and filed and intended to address tomorrow. She realized, very tired, and she was still here. That was the thing. After everything that had been thrown at her today, the blow, the complaint, the general's phone call, the code, the 5th floor reckoning, she was still in this building, in this chair, at this station, and her name was still on the board as the nurse of record for Dale Carver until the handoff completed. She had not been removed. She had not been suspended. She had not been quietly asked to go home while administration sorted things out, which was the gentle institutional knife that hospitals sometimes used when they wanted to protect themselves more than they wanted to protect their staff. She was still here. The meeting that reconvened in Spears's office at 11:40 involved fewer people than the earlier one. Voss and his attorney had left the building at 11:15, not under arrest, but with an explicit instruction from Rafferty that he was not to return to the hospital without prior written notification to the CD office and without hospital administration's approval. He had signed a document acknowledging this. His attorney had advised him to sign it. He had gone without looking at Lauren on his way out. She'd been at the station. He'd passed the end of the corridor. He had looked at the floor, which was its own kind of communication. The meeting that reconvened was Wynne, Foss, Spears, Garrett, Cho, and Lauren. Spears spoke first. He was a man who had spent the day being consistently behind the events in his own building, and he appeared to have made a decision somewhere between 10 and 11 o'clock to stop trying to be ahead of them and simply respond to what was actually happening. Nurse Merritt, he said, I want to formally state, for the record, and in front of these witnesses, that this hospital's position is that your clinical decisions today were correct. Your professional conduct was appropriate, and the assault you sustained occurred during the performance of your duties in a manner that this institution condemns without reservation. He had clearly prepared those words. They were good words. Lauren noted them. The complaint filed by Colonel Voss against your competence and professionalism is being formally withdrawn from your personnel file, Cho added. As of tonight, it will not appear in any record going forward. Thank you, Lauren said. The hospital intends to pursue all available legal remedies on your behalf, Cho continued, in cooperation with the CID investigation and with the Harrisburg DA's office. You'll be contacted by our legal team tomorrow for a formal recorded statement, if you're willing. I'm willing. Spears looked at her. He looked at her the way he had when she'd walked into the room at the beginning of this session, with the recalibrated gaze of a man who had spent all day operating on one set of assumptions and was now doing the work of revising them. Is there anything else you need from this hospital tonight, Nurse Merritt? Lauren thought about the question. She took it seriously because it was seriously meant, and she'd learned a long time ago that the difference between a courtesy and a real offer was whether the person asking was prepared to hear a real answer. Dale Carver gets the cardiologist in the morning, she said. First available appointment, not whenever there's a slot. He coded tonight after days of not being monitored adequately at the VA level. He needs to be the priority. She paused. And his visiting hours tomorrow should be restricted until the cardiologist clears him for family contact. His brother generates stress responses that are currently a contraindication. Spears blinked. Then, I'll make sure of it. Garrett was writing something down. Wynne was looking at Lauren with an expression that had something in it. Lauren couldn't entirely read across the desk, something that was probably not going to be spoken in this room with these people. Then I'm done, Lauren said. She stood up. I'll be available for the legal team tomorrow. My personal number is in the system. She looked at Spears. And I'll be in for my next scheduled shift on Thursday, unless I hear otherwise. You'll hear nothing otherwise, Spears said. She picked up her badge from where she'd set it on the desk corner, clipped it back to her scrubs, and walked out. Wynne caught up with her at the elevator. Not rushing, she simply moved when Lauren moved, and she was at the elevator bank when Lauren pressed the button, which told Lauren that General Patricia Wynne had in her 50s lost exactly none of the capacity for efficient movement she'd presumably had at 30. They stood at the elevator together. The floor was quiet. The building had the particular hush of a hospital after midnight, not empty, never empty, but the daytime volume stripped away, and what was left was the essential sound. Monitors, footsteps, the distant mechanical breath of the HVAC. You didn't have to open that file tonight, Lauren said. She said it without accusation. She had given up accusation somewhere around the second employment, but when she'd learned that the things people did, because they thought they were right, fundamentally different from the things people did, because they thought they could, and that treating them the same way was a waste of energy. No, Wynne said, I didn't have to, but you did. He needed to understand what he'd done. Wynne looked at the elevator door. Not just legally. He needed to understand it the way you can only understand something when the full picture is in front of you. She paused. I didn't open the file to make you look impressive. I opened it because he was standing there, constructing a version of you that had nothing to do with who you are, and I wasn't willing to let that stand. The elevator arrived. They got in. Lauren pressed 2. Wynne didn't press anything. I chose to leave, Lauren said, as the doors closed. I chose this. The floor, the charts, the 11-hour shifts. I chose it because I was done with the other thing. I know. I'm not a story, Patricia. I'm not a symbol. I know that too. Wynne looked at her in the steel reflection of the elevator doors, the two of them side by side, one in uniform and one in scrubs, with a bruise developing its final color across her cheekbone. But what happened to you today was wrong, and the only thing I had that could make it right was the truth. So I used it. She paused. I'd do it again. Lauren looked at her reflection. She looked at the bruise. I know you would, she said. Not warmly, not coldly, just as the fact it was. The elevator opened on 2. Lauren stepped out. Wynne stayed in. Get some sleep, Wynne said, as the doors began to close. You too, Lauren said. The doors closed. She changed out of her scrubs in the locker room and stood at the sink for a moment, running cold water over her wrists, not for any clinical reason, just for the sensation of something cold and uncomplicated. The fluorescent light above the sink had a barely perceptible flicker that she'd noticed on her first shift 3 years ago, and had reported and been told would be fixed and had never been fixed, and she'd long since stopped noticing it, except in moments like this one, when she was too tired to not notice everything. She looked at her face in the mirror above the sink. The bruise had settled into its mature form, the body's final position on blunt force trauma, the swelling largely resolved, the discoloration spread wide across the cheekbone and feathering toward the jaw. She'd had worse. She had, truthfully, had considerably worse. But she had never had it here, in this life, in this building, and the fact of it in this mirror was different from the fact of it in any other mirror she'd ever stood in front of. Because this was the life she'd chosen to be smaller in. The quieter one. The one where she used her hands to fix things rather than to survive them. Where the stakes were high in the human way rather than the operational way. Where she came home at the end of a shift to a 2-bedroom apartment 12 minutes from the hospital and made coffee and read things that had nothing to do with procedure or protocol. And someone had come into that life and struck her face. She dried her hands. She put on her jacket. She picked up her bag. Terrence Holt was in the hallway outside the locker room. Of course he was. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who has been standing in hallways his entire professional life, and sees no reason to apologize for it. He looked at her face, at the jacket, the bag, the end-of-shift fact of her, and he straightened up. "Car's outside," he said. "I have a car. I know. It's 12:20, and you've been on your feet since 6, and you just cardioverted a man and sat through a formal charge filing. Let somebody drive you home." She looked at him. "You're going to stand here until I say yes." "I'm going to stand here," he confirmed. She almost smiled. Almost. Fine. They walked to the elevator together, him slightly behind, her slightly ahead, the same geometry they'd moved in years ago in very different corridors. It was comfortable in the way that the presence of someone who has been through things with you is always comfortable, not because it was warm or easy, but because it required no performance. In the lobby, the night security officer waved Lauren through with the recognitions of someone who has seen her come and go for 3 years. He looked at her face, the bruise, and then looked away quickly, which was its own kind of response. Outside, the October air was in the mid-40s and smelled like the Susquehanna Valley at night, which was a specific thing, a combination of cold water and fallen leaves and something industrial 3 miles east that never quite went away. Lauren stood in it for a moment on the sidewalk. A black SUV was at the curb. Margaret Foss was in the front passenger seat on the phone. Holt opened the rear door for Lauren. She got in. Holt got in the other side. The driver, a man she didn't know, 40s, the same unmistakably not civilian build as everyone who'd come with. Wynn pulled away from the curb without being told where to go, which meant Holt had given him the address. Lauren noted this. She was too tired to object to it. They drove in silence for several minutes. The streets of Harrisburg at 12:30 on a Tuesday in October were largely empty, the lights cycling through their sequences for no one. "What happens to him?" Lauren said. Holt knew who she meant. "CID will complete the investigation within 30 days. The charges carry potential for court-martial at the 06 level. He'll face a formal Article 32 hearing." He paused. "The civil matter will run separately. DA's office in Cumberland County has handled officer misconduct before. His career is over," Holt said. Simply. Not with satisfaction, just as a fact, the way doctors say the lesion is malignant, because the truth doesn't become kinder for being softened. He knew it when he signed the document tonight. His attorney knew it. A colonel doesn't walk away from a documented assault on a civilian medical professional in a patient care setting. Not with CID involved. Not with a 4-star witness. Lauren looked out the window. A gas station passed. A closed diner. The river somewhere to the left, invisible in the dark but present. His brother, she said. Dale Carver is not responsible for what his brother did. I know, that's not what I meant. She watched a traffic light turn from red to green for an empty intersection. Dale's going to carry this. Whatever happens to Voss the court-martial, the career, all of it, Dale is going to carry it because he was the reason his brother was there. Holt was quiet for a moment. That's probably true. Make sure somebody talks to him, not about the case. Just she stopped. He's a veteran. He's been back from deployment for 4 months. He's in a step-down unit after a cardiac event with nobody to talk to except a brother who is about to have his career end. She turned to look at Holt. Someone should talk to him. Holt held her gaze. I'll see to it. She turned back to the window. They arrived at her building 4 minutes later. She got out before Holt could say whatever he was assembling to say she could hear him assembling it. Had always been able to hear when he was preparing to say something that required preparation. Lauren. He was out of the car, standing on the sidewalk. She turned. The file, he said. When opening it, I want you to know that decision was made before we knew what Voss had done. Before assault? Before everything. He held her gaze in the dark, and there was something in his face that was harder to read than anything she'd seen from him today. There's been a conversation, at a level above when, about your record, about what it could mean for something else. Something coming. He stopped, chose his next words with the care of a man who has spent decades being precise about what he does and doesn't say. They've been watching you here. The nursing, the clinical performance, the way you managed today. His jaw moved once. Someone is going to ask you something, Lauren, in the next few days. And I wanted you to know it's coming before it gets here. She stood on the sidewalk in the October cold and looked at the man who had come to a hospital in Harrisburg with a 4-star general because she'd sent a 4-word text message, and she thought about the psychological professionally, and she thought about the smaller life she had chosen and the way it had spent the past 15 hours being made complicated by everything she'd walked away from. What are they going to ask me? She said. I can't tell you that. Not here, Terrence. Not here, he said again. And in his voice was the specific quality of a man who is not keeping a secret because he wants to, but because the category of the secret requires it, and who is telling her what he can, which is that the secret exists, so she's not walking into it blind. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked into her building. The elevator in her building was slower than the hospital's. She stood in it and watched the numbers change. 2nd floor. 3rd. She lived on the 4th. She went in. She put her bag down. She filled a glass of water from the tap, not filtered, just tap, because it was 12:47, and she was not going to stand at a filter at 12:47, and stood at her kitchen window, drinking it and looking at the city in the dark. The hospital was visible from here if you knew where to look. She always knew where to look. Her phone, which had been in her bag since she'd left the floor, lit up on the counter. She looked at it. The message was from a number she didn't recognize. A different number from Holt's, different from Wynn's, different from Margaret Foss's. An area code she didn't immediately place. 5 words. She read them once. She set the glass down. She read them again. And on the 3rd read, standing at her kitchen window, with the bruised dark on her face and the city quiet below, and the hospital lit against the sky 2 miles east, Lauren Merritt understood exactly what Terrence Holt had not been able to tell her on the sidewalk, and exactly why the next few days were not going to look the way she had spent the last 3 years arranging her life to look. The message said, "We need you back. Tonight." She read the message a 4th time, which didn't change anything about it, but gave her hands something to do while her mind ran the calculation. "We need you back. Tonight. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Tonight," which meant the situation, whatever it was, had a clock on it. She had been in enough rooms with enough clocks to know that tonight from an unknown number routed through channels that Terrence Holt had been careful not to describe was not a casual ask. It was not the kind of message you sent because you wanted to. It was the kind you sent because you had run out of other options, and the clock was the clock. She set the phone face down on the counter. She stood in her kitchen, in the dark for a moment, the city lights coming through the window at a low angle, the glass of water still half full on the counter, her bag, full still on the floor by the door where she'd dropped it. The bruise on her face throbbed with her pulse the way bruises at this stage do, a rhythmic reminder that the day had been physical as well as everything else. She thought about Dale Carver in the step-down unit on the third floor, his heart doing its careful, monitored work. She thought about the photograph in Voss's hands, the woman in combat gear with blood on her hands that was not her own. She thought about what Holt had said on the sidewalk, the deliberate precision of someone is going to ask you something, and the way he'd looked when he said it, which was the way a man looks when the thing he's telling you is only the outline of a thing, and the thing itself is much larger. She picked the phone back up. She typed, "Who is this?" The response came in 40 seconds, which was fast enough to tell her whoever was on the other end had been watching the screen. The response was a name. She knew the name. She closed her eyes for 3 seconds, opened them, put the phone in her jacket pocket, picked up her bag from where she'd dropped it, walked back out the door she'd come through 4 minutes ago. The address in the follow-up message took her to a building 12 minutes from her apartment, not a government facility, not a hospital, not anywhere she would have guessed. A converted industrial space in the warehouse district, south of the rail yard, the kind of building that had been a printing company or a textile operation or something else unglamorous in its previous life, and was now occupied in a way that had no sign on the door and no indication on any public record of what went on inside it. The black SUV from earlier was parked at the curb. Holt was leaning against it in the way he'd been leaning against the wall outside her locker room, not waiting, exactly. More like existing in a space, while a thing happened that he'd already accepted was going to happen. He looked at her when she came around the corner. He didn't look surprised. "You should have told me," she said. "I told you what I could." "That's not the same thing." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He straightened up and held the door to the building open. "Come in. It'll be clearer inside than I can make it on a sidewalk." She went in. The interior was what she'd expected, functional, temporary feeling, despite probably being long established, the specific aesthetic of a workspace that prioritizes utility over anything else. Good equipment, maps that weren't decorative, people moving with purpose between stations. 3 of them looked up. She walked in and then looked back at what they were doing, which was either professional discipline or an indication that her arrival had been expected and prepared for and factored into whatever was already running. General Wynne was at a table near the far wall, still in uniform, with a laptop open and a paper map spread beside it and a cup of coffee that looked like it had been made some time ago and forgotten. She looked up when Lauren came in. Their eyes met across the room. Wynne stood. "I know it's 1 a.m, Wynne said when Lauren reached the table. "I know what today was. I know what I'm asking." "You haven't asked yet," Lauren said. "No." Wynne looked at the map, then back at Lauren. "There's a medical emergency. Classified location, 40 minutes out. 3 casualties, 1 critical, 2 serious. The critical case is a chest wound with a hemothorax that the field medic on site has been managing for 6 hours with what he had, and what he had was not enough." She paused. "The nearest surgical team with the clearance to go in is 2 hours out. We have a window, a narrow one. What's the clearance level?" Wynne told her. Lauren had held that clearance level for 9 years. Whether she still held it technically, in the formal sense, was a separate question from whether the people in this room were prepared to act as though she did. "Who's the field medic?" Lauren said. "Specialist named Wren. 26 years old. Second deployment. He's been doing everything right, but he's been doing it alone for 6 hours, and the patient's pressure has been dropping for the last 40 minutes. Wynne held her gaze. "He needs someone who's seen a tension pneumo, converted in the dark with one hand. Lauren knew that reference was not random. She had done exactly that once, in conditions she did not need to have described to her again because they were already fully resident in her memory without being invited. She looked at the map. She looked at the casualty description that Wynne had pushed across the table. She read the field medic's last vital set the numbers in the column, the timestamps beside them, the trajectory they described if you knew how to read a trajectory. The trajectory was not good. If I go in, Lauren said. It doesn't mean anything about what comes after. It doesn't mean She stopped, found the right words. I went into nursing because I chose it. Not because I was hiding, because it was what I wanted my life to be. Tonight doesn't change that. I know, Wins said. I mean it, Patricia. I know you mean it. And when this is over, you walk back out and you go home and you go in for your Thursday shift, and nothing about tonight appears anywhere that isn't classified. Wynne held the table's edge with both hands. I'm not trying to take your life back, Lauren. I'm asking you to save one. Just this once. Just tonight. Lauren looked at the vital column one more time. The systolic at the last entry, 74, dropping. She straightened up. What equipment is on site? Wynne exhaled, not with relief, not quite, but with the breath of someone who has been holding something very carefully for a long time. Everything you'll need. Wren inventoried it 20 minutes ago when we told him you might be coming. Might, Lauren said. Wynne corrected. When we told him you were coming. The 40 minutes in the vehicle were not discussed afterward and are not material to what happened when Lauren arrived, except in the sense that 40 minutes is a long time to sit with a decision you've already made and feel the full weight of it, without the action itself to stand behind. She sat in the back of the SUV with Holt beside her, and a field kit on the seat between them that she'd opened and inventoried in the first 8 minutes and then closed because she knew what was in it and she didn't need to look at it again. Holt didn't talk. She didn't talk. The driver drove. She thought about the patient, the chest wound, the hemothorax, 6 hours of field management, a young medic doing everything correctly in the dark. She thought about the specific clinical picture of a hemothorax that has been partially drained but not resolved, the way the blood accumulates in the pleural space and compresses the lung from the outside. The math of how much compression a person can sustain before their pressure tells you the math has run out. She thought about Dale Carver's potassium at 3.1 this morning and 3.6 tonight, and the drip rate she'd held, and the attacks she'd cardioverted, and the things that had happened in between. She thought about the fact that she was in a vehicle in the dark at 1 in the morning going toward an emergency, that nobody outside 3 vehicles and a converted warehouse knew was happening, wearing her jacket over her nursing scrubs because she hadn't changed, with a bruise on her left cheek from a man who had assumed she was powerless. She thought all of this without drama and without the kind of internal narrative that the moment might have seemed to call for, because drama and internal narrative were the enemies of clinical precision, and clinical precision was the only thing that was going to matter in the next hour. What happened in the next hour was not elegant. It was not the kind of thing that gets described in detail in any document that isn't classified, and it is not described in detail here. What can be said is this. The patient was alive when Lauren arrived. His pressure was 71/42, and his respiratory rate was 32, and the young medic named Wren, 26 years old, second deployment. 6 hours alone, with a critical casualty, and the specific kind of exhausted that goes all the way down to the cellular level, looked up when she came through the door with an expression that Lauren had seen on people's faces before, and that never got easier to see. It was the expression of someone who has been holding something together by willpower alone and has just been told they can put it down. Talk me through what you've done, Lauren said, kneeling beside the patient. Wren talked, fast, precise, the trained recitation of someone who knows that what they say matters and has no time to say it twice. Lauren listened with her hands already moving assessment, not intervention yet. Because you don't touch what you don't understand, and you don't assume your understanding is complete. It took her 4 minutes to have the full picture. What Wren had done was correct and had kept the patient alive. What Wren hadn't done was not a failure. It was the limit of what one person with field equipment and no backup could sustain. She told him he'd done well. She said it once, clearly, because he needed to hear it and because it was true, and then she moved past it because there wasn't time for anything that wasn't the patient. The next 40 minutes were a different kind of work than the floor of Calvary Cross Medical Center, and also the same kind of work in the way that all medical work is the same. Underneath its variations, a body failing, a person trying to stop the failure, the specific human responsibility of being the one in the room who knows what to do. Her hands were steady. They were always steady when it mattered. The patient's pressure was 91/60 when the surgical team arrived 2 hours later, which meant the window had held and the math had not run out. She was back in Harrisburg by 5:40 in the morning. Holt drove her home because the driver had gone with the surgical team, and Holt had waited in the vehicle, in the cold, for 2 hours, which she hadn't asked him to do and which she didn't comment on. He pulled up in front of her building. The sky was doing the October thing it does just before 6, that specific gray-blue that isn't dawn yet, but is the first indication that dawn has committed to arriving. "Go home, Terrence?" she said, getting out. "I will." He looked at her across the seat. "You know that thing I said earlier, about someone asking you something?" "I already answered it," she said. He was quiet for a second. "It doesn't have to be the answer. Tonight was tonight. If you say no to whatever comes next, it's Terrence." She held the door. "Go home." He went. She went. Upstairs. She stood in the shower for 10 minutes under water that was hotter than was probably good for her skin, and then stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at her face, which now had the bruise and also the particular appearance of a person who has been awake for 23 hours and has been hit and has cardioverted a patient and has done other things not going to be listed on any visible resume. She looked like herself. That was the thing. Under all of it, the exhaustion, the bruise, the accumulated weight of the last 23 hours, she looked like herself. She set an alarm for 9, which gave her 3 hours, which was not enough and was what she had. She slept. Thursday morning, Calvary Cross Medical Center. Lauren came in for her shift at 6. She badged through the employee entrance the way she always did, took the stairs to the second floor the way she always did, changed into her scrubs in the locker room with the flickering light that was still not fixed, clipped her badge to her chest, and came out onto the floor at 6:12. The floor had a different quality than Tuesday, not louder, not quieter, different, in the way that things are different when the people in a shared space have processed something together. The night nurse giving handoff, a woman named Petra Vasilis, who Lauren had worked beside for 2 years, looked up when Lauren came to the station and held the look for a second before saying, "Welcome back," in a tone that meant something more than the words. "Anything on the board I need to know?" Lauren said, pulling up the patient list. They did handoff. It was normal. It was the work. At 6:45, Sandra Kulik arrived and found Lauren at the medication cart and stayed beside her with a cup of coffee for herself and a cup for Lauren that Lauren had not asked for, which was the closest Sandra ever got to a grand gesture. Lauren took the coffee. "Dale Carver's cardiologist saw him yesterday morning," Sandra said. "Confirmed the ejection fraction. Adjusted his medication. Wants a follow-up in 3 weeks. Discharge is planned for tomorrow pending 24-hour arrhythmia monitoring." "Good. He asked about you." "I know. I stopped by the step-down unit yesterday afternoon." Sandra looked at her sideways. "You weren't scheduled yesterday." "I know." Sandra let it sit there without pressing it, which was very Sandra. "Then the DA's office called for you at 2 yesterday. Cho's office coordinated. Your formal statement is scheduled for Monday." "I know. Cho called me." and CED sent a written confirmation to Hospital Legal that the investigation of Voss is ongoing and that his access to this facility has been formally restricted pending resolution. Sandra paused, cup at her lips. He's been suspended from his command, pending the Article 32 hearing. Lauren documented a medication pull. I heard. His attorney issued a statement yesterday. Said Voss accepts full responsibility for his actions and is cooperating with all relevant investigations. Sandra's voice was entirely neutral, which was how she expressed the things she felt most strongly about. Didn't mention you by name. Used the phrase, the nursing staff involved. He'll use my name at the hearing, Lauren said. That's fine. Sandra looked at her. The morning light through the corridor windows was doing the autumn thing, that low-angle October light that comes in gold and sideways and makes everything look slightly more significant than it is. Are you all right? Lauren thought about the question with the same seriousness she'd given it Tuesday night. I think so, she said, which was more uncertain than Tuesday night's answer, but also more honest, because she was tired in a way that 3 hours of sleep and a shift in between had not touched, and she was carrying something she hadn't put a name to yet. And she was also standing in this corridor in this hospital, with her badge on her chest, and all of those things were simultaneously true. Good enough, Sandra said, which meant, I believe you, and I'm here, and let's work. They worked. At 9:15, Lauren was doing a wound assessment in room 6 when she heard the elevator tone, and then, a few seconds later, a change in the ambient sound of the floor, a particular quality of attention that happens when someone walks into a space and the space notices. She finished the assessment, documented it, and came out of room 6 at 9:22. General Patricia Wynn was at the nursing station, still in uniform. She'd been in uniform for, Lauren did the math, somewhere north of 30 hours, which was for Wynn was probably not unusual, and which she was carrying without visible evidence of its weight. She was talking to Sandra, who was responding with the careful courtesy she deployed with people whose exact role she hadn't quite categorized yet. Wynn saw Lauren come out of room 6 and said something brief to Sandra and walked toward her. They met in the middle of the corridor, which was not a dramatic location. It was simply where the geometry put them, equidistant from the station and the rooms, the ordinary geography of a working floor. He's going to make it, Wynn said. She didn't say who. She didn't need to. Lauren nodded once. Surgical team completed the procedure at 0400. He's in recovery. Pressure is holding. Wynn paused. Wren is requesting a commendation for the field medic who responded. He doesn't know your name. He knows a medic came in and the situation changed. She looked at Lauren steadily. I wanted you to know the outcome. Thank you for telling me. They stood in the corridor. Around them, the floor moved in its ordinary way, footsteps, call lights, the distant sound of a monitor, the specific percussion of a hospital at mid-morning. None of it paused for this conversation. None of it knew it should. I meant what I said the other night, Lauren said. About the choice, I know. This is what I'm doing. This is the life. I know that too. Wynn looked at the floor around them, station, the rooms, the board with the patient names, the medication cart, the nurses moving between things. She looked at it with the specific gaze of someone seeing something for what it actually is, rather than what it superficially resembles. You know, for a long time I thought you left because you were finished, because you'd hit a limit. I did hit a limit, Lauren said. I know, but I thought the limit was capacity, endurance. Wynn paused. It wasn't, was it? Lauren looked at the board, at the names on it, at the room numbers and the care plans and the medication times and the 12 individual human situations currently unfolding behind 12 different doors on this floor. I left because I wanted to save people differently, she said. Not in the way that required what the other thing required. In the way that she stopped, found it, in the way that let me know their names. Wynn was quiet for a moment. Then she said, That's a better answer than I expected. It's just true. I know. Wynn straightened. The formal recognition for your service record and for Tuesday. It's going through proper channels. Your commendations will be updated. The institutional record will reflect everything accurately. She held Lauren's gaze. You'll receive correspondence in the next 2 weeks. I don't need recognition, Patricia. I know you don't need it. That's not why it's happening. Wynn held the look. It's happening because the record should be accurate. Because you existed in those places, and you did those things, and the paperwork should say so. Not for you. She paused. For the next person who looks at the record and needs to know that someone like you was there. Lauren held that. It was not nothing. It was, actually, the one form of recognition she could not easily refuse, not because it benefited her, but because it was true. And Lauren had spent her entire professional life in service of accurate records, of documentation, that said exactly what had happened, without embellishment and without erasure. Okay, she said. And the hospital Wynn continued. Spears signed a formal institutional statement yesterday. It'll be distributed to the staff before end of week. It says exactly. I read it that the clinical judgment exercised by Nurse Lauren Merritt on the morning of October 15th was correct. Her professional conduct was exemplary. The assault she sustained was indefensible, and the hospital is committed to ensuring that this building remains a safe environment for every person who works in it. Person who works section. Lauren said nothing for a moment. You read it, she said. I suggested some of the wording, Wynn said, without apology. Lauren almost smiled. It was the closest she'd come all week. At 11 o'clock, Lauren went to the step-down unit on the 3rd floor on her break. Dale Carver was sitting up. The leads were still on him. The telemetry pack clipped at his gown, but his color was better, genuinely better. Not the better that people describe when they mean not worse. He looked like a man who had been frightened, and was now on the other side of the frightened, and was now on the other side of the frightening, which produced its own particular quality of presence. He looked up when she came in. I heard you came by yesterday, he said. Briefly. You were asleep, Troy told me. He meant the nurse, Danes, who had apparently passed on the information. He said, you checked my chart. It's a habit. Dale looked at her face. The bruise had moved into the yellow-green phase, which was somehow more visible than the purple-black phase, because it was closer to the color of nothing, and yet still obviously not nothing. Does it still hurt? Less than Tuesday. He nodded. He had his hands in his lap, and they were stiller than they'd been on Tuesday night, which was what stability did to a body that had been frightened. He looked like a man who had done some thinking in the last 48 hours, and was still in the middle of it. I want you to know something, he said, about Rick. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. He looked at the window. The view from the step-down unit was the same parking structure view as the consultation room, which was not a great view, but Cobb Topper Light did what it could with it. He's going to face a court-martial. His attorney told my mother this morning. She called me. He swallowed. She cried. She kept asking what happened, how it got to this. Lauren waited. I don't have a good answer for her, Dale said. He's not a monster. I want you to know that. He's a man who's been told for 20 years that authority is a substitute for accountability, and he believed it. And then he walked into a room and did something that proved him wrong. He turned back to her. That's not an excuse. I know it's not. He pressed his lips together. I grew up watching him. He was the one who came to my games when my parents couldn't. He drove 6 hours, like I told you. That's the same man. I know, Lauren said. Dale looked at her. How do you not hate him? She thought about this genuinely, not because it was a complicated question, but because it deserved a genuine answer. Hating him would take up space I use for other things, she said. I have patience. I have charts. I have a floor that needs me on it. She paused. What he did was wrong. The system is addressing it. That's enough. That's enough, he repeated, like he was testing the weight of it. It has to be. He was quiet for a moment. Then thank you. for not giving up on my care when I don't give up on care because someone in the family is difficult, Lauren said. That's not how this works. I know. He almost smiled. But still, she stood up. She had 4 patients waiting on 2. Your cardiologist cleared family visits this afternoon. He should come in the morning, not before the monitoring is reviewed. She looked at Dale. Tell him to knock this time. Dale Carver let out a short, surprised exhale that was almost a laugh. Almost, yeah, he said. I'll tell him. The formal statement from hospital administration was distributed to the Calvary Cross Medical Center staff on Friday morning via internal communication. Lauren read it in the locker room before her shift in the 2 minutes between changing into her scrubs and going to the floor. It said what Wynne had told her it would say in language that was clear and institutional and left no room for interpretation. She read it once, folded the printout, put it in her bag. She went to work. The floor received the statement in the way that floors receive things, with the specific processing of people who have a job to do and who integrate new information into the existing structure of the work rather than stopping everything to address it. Marcus, who'd told Sandra he'd never seen anything like Tuesday, said nothing to Lauren directly but held the medication cart steady without being asked when her hands were full, which was its own form of acknowledgement. Diane Ferraro, who had been 6 steps behind her when the VTech alarm sounded, gave her a nod at the station that communicated several things efficiently. Petra, the night nurse, had already been there and already knew. Sandra said nothing about the statement at all, which meant she had read it and considered it fully sufficient, and had moved on, which was the highest possible Sandra Kulik review. The week turned. The days accrued. The work was the work. The Article 32, hearing for Colonel Richard Voss, was scheduled for 6 weeks later. Lauren gave her formal statement to the DA's office on Monday, as planned. She gave a second statement to CD on Wednesday. Both times she was precise, chronological, complete. Both times she was the last person in the room to leave. Voss pleaded no contest to the civil assault charge in a Harrisburg courtroom on a gray November morning. His attorney read a prepared statement in which Voss expressed remorse for his actions and acknowledged that his conduct had not reflected the standards he had held himself to across his career. I excused. The statement was careful. It was written by the attorney, and it showed. Lauren was not present in the courtroom. She was at work. She heard about it from Cho's office at 3 in the afternoon, between a wound assessment and a medication pass. The court-martial proceedings moved on their own timeline, in their own jurisdiction, with their own pace. They were ongoing for months after the civil matter, resolved. The outcome Voss' rank and career moved in the direction that Holt had described on the sidewalk that first night, which was the direction that anyone who had seen the footage from Bay 7 had understood from the moment they saw it. Lauren did not follow the proceedings closely. She was informed of major developments by Cho and, occasionally, by Wynne in brief calls that were precise and informational, and that Lauren appreciated for their brevity. She thought about it sometimes, not often, not with the frequencies that a person in a film or a story might think about it. Because real life doesn't give you the soundtrack that cues your contemplative moments. And Lauren's life was full of 12-hour shifts and potassium checks and wound assessments and the various ongoing human emergencies that constituted a working emergency department. But she thought about it sometimes. She thought about what it meant that a man could walk through a world for 4 to 4 years wearing authority like armor and then step into the wrong room on the wrong Tuesday and have everything he'd built on the assumption that other people were smaller than him begin to come apart. She didn't think about this with satisfaction. She thought about it the way she thought about most things that had a lesson embedded in them as information, as something worth knowing. The recognition that General Wynne had described came in a formal letter on a Tuesday afternoon 6 weeks after the incident, which Lauren noticed only because it was a Tuesday, and the coincidence seemed like the kind of thing a less pragmatic person might assign meaning to. She read the letter at the kitchen counter with coffee that was still warm. It was formal language, official language, the language of institutions acknowledging things they had not previously acknowledged in writing. And it said her service record was updated to reflect the full scope of her commendations and her contributions. And it said the letter was for her personal record and was not subject to disclosure. She folded it. She put it in the file in the drawer in her bedroom, where she kept important documents, her nursing license, her lease, her car registration. Documents that confirmed her existence in a form that other people could verify. She went to make more coffee. She stood at the kitchen window and looked at the city in the afternoon light. The hospital was visible from here if you knew where to look. She always knew where to look. What she had done, she had done. Not to be recognized, not to be vindicated, not to prove anything to the man who had struck her, or to the institution that had briefly wavered in its response, or to the people who had come from outside the building to tell a room full of administrators who she was. She had done it because a patient's potassium was at 3.1 and his cardiac function was compromised, and the drip rate she'd been ordered to maintain was the correct drip rate, and because that was the job, and because the job mattered. That was the whole of it. The rest, the record, the letter, the hearing, the statement on hospital letterhead, the acknowledgement from the general in the corridor, the rest was the world catching up to a truth that had existed before anyone in that building knew what they were looking at. She had known. She had always known. Not because of her service record or her classified commendations, or the photograph of a woman in combat gear that had rewritten a room full of powerful people's understanding of an October morning. But because she had stood at Dale Carver's bedside and read his chart and understood his physiology and maintained the correct clinical decision under pressure that had escalated from dismissal to assault, and she had been right. That was the thing that had always been true, from 11:40 in the morning to everything that followed. She had been right, not because she was exceptional, not because she was decorated, not because 4 people who knew her past had walked off an elevator and changed the shape of what the room understood, but because she had done her work, and the work had been worth doing. There is a specific kind of person who moves through the world without announcing what they carry, who absorbs the assumption of smallness the way water absorbs stone patiently, continuously, without apparent effect, until one day the stone is different and the water is exactly the same. These people are not rare. They are in every hospital, every station, every classroom, every ordinary room where someone has decided, without evidence, that the person in front of them is less than what they are. They are standing at bedsides and medication carts and nursing stations, and they are doing the work correctly, and they are doing it whether or not anyone in the room knows what they are capable of. And sometimes the room finds out. Lauren Merritt finished her coffee, rinsed the cup, checked the time. Her next shift started at 6. She went to get ready.